Welcome to On the Porch, the podcast. Thanks for joining us. Well, you just heard By the Mark by Gillian Welch, and that's from her Revival album. And we started off that set with Long Ride Home by Patty Griffin from 1000 Kisses. Now, the Gillian Welch song is one that has been influential on our guest, Savannah Sipple, who is in the studio with us today. Savannah is the author of the new poetry collection, WWJD And Other Poems, which explores what it is to be a queer woman in Appalachia. She says the book is rooted in Appalachian culture and in her own body. With a beer-drinking Jesus as her wingman, she navigates this difficult terrain of stereotype, conservative evangelicalism, and perhaps most, shame. A writer from eastern Kentucky, Savannah currently resides in Lexington with her fiancé, Ashley. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Silas. Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate you being here. Why don't you start off by telling our listeners what you want them to know about your book?
Well, the book is, in a lot of ways, it's a coming out memoir for me. It's poetry through and through. But it for me, it just captures a huge portion of my journey into self-acceptance. And the book itself is in 3 parts, and I tell everyone it's like a progression of being closeted and not wanting to be gay, and then realizing I was gay and coming to terms with that, and then finally being okay with that. And the whole thing is reckoning it with my faith. And then there's also, the book touches on domestic abuse and misogyny that I've dealt with. And so it's really just a journey.
So many great layers going on there. In the book, you make Christ into a very specific character, and he's presented in a totally new way. It's very original. It's one of my favorite things about the book. He's hip and laid back and, gives this great down-home advice. But now some people get uncomfortable if their idea of Christ is challenged at all. So did you worry about that, or was that that's sort of the point, but did that make it that much more fun and or challenging, or what?
I think it was a challenge because I wanted to write about Christ in a way that sort of captured my own experience with trying to come to terms with the fact that I had these beliefs, but also I've known for a long time that I was gay. And so, and in the church where I grew up and where I practiced, and so much of my beliefs were founded, homosexuality is not accepted. And so I did want to turn our idea of who Jesus is on its head. But I also really just wanted to strip it down to the basics of, the core of who he is, the people he spent time with as a person, the people he really cared for, and think about, this is really who he was. What would he do in these situations? And I think that, a lot of modern Christianity or Christianity today boxes him in and molds him into this character or this being to fit a certain set of rules, or I really just wanted to break out of that completely.
I love when I hear you read one of the WWJD books in front of an audience, because initially they laugh because, it's a new kind of Jesus. But by the end of the poem, there's a reverence. So I think that's a real testament to the wonderful balance you have struck in creating that character, is that while it is totally new and there's wit involved and creativity and challenging our own notions, you still manage somehow. It never feels sacrilegious, and you're able to still make it reverent. So I love that aspect of it. And it really reminds me of that notion of, a Christian should be Christ-like. And so your Jesus is like a person, like a normal person. So I love that way that's flipped. So it's really interesting.
It always surprises me. I mean, I know there are poems that utilize humor in the collection, but it surprises me at times when people laugh and when they don't. And then it sometimes surprises me, especially now that I've done a fair amount of readings from the book, when someone laughs at something that no one else has laughed at before.
Right.
So that's always interesting to see how people react.
Mm-hmm. Well, won't you read us one of those poems?
Okay. I read this one. It's from the third section of the book, which is where so many of the WWJD poems are. But the title of this one is Jesus is My Best Girlfriend, My Dutch Boy. I ask him, why me? Beg, can't I be normal in one way? It weighs him down, our hate, makes his shoulders sag, his back bend. He touches the slits on my arms where I try to bleed out the worst of me. Slumps, bone-tired, looks me in the eye and says, love, don't break the yolk.
That's a great one to illustrate what I was just talking about, because, Jesus is my girlfriend, my Dutch boy.
Yeah.
So there's that sort of irreverence, but then it's really a very religious, it's real religious imagery, right, with him touching these wounds and all that. So I love that balance you're striking.
Yeah, I worked very hard because I wanted particularly this section and maybe a little bit of the end of the second section to really capture my coming into queer culture. And so then figuring out how to marry that with also the religious coming to terms. Like, it's almost like Jesus and I in our relationship are trying to come to terms with what's different about us now. And so kind of marrying all of those together. And that's probably how I would refer to him. And so, But
can you talk a little bit about that phrase in the title, my girlfriend, my Dutch boy? What?
Yeah, so I think that so much of what has shaped me or shaped my queer identity so far has been my friendships with gay men. And so my two of my closest friends are both gay men, and they call each other girl all the time. And so I wanted to capture that. And then I was looking for a phrase. There was a point where I would have called myself a fag hag because I, for a long time, presented as straight, and two of my closest friends were gay. And so I wanted a term that would capture the opposite of that. And so that's where I did some research and came up with Dutch boy.
Well, we both know so many people to whom religion has been damaging, but also many others who have found religion to be a great balm for them. I think most people I know would say both to some degree. Now, there's a lot about the damage in the book. Can you talk a little bit about some of the positive aspects of growing up so steeped in religious culture? Well,
I mean, I think that it gave me a sense of community. And there were a lot of ways where I felt like I didn't belong growing up. I wasn't a traditional girl. I was very tomboyish. I played a lot of sports, which isn't totally out of the ordinary, but I just wasn't completely feminine the way all of my friends were, or even most of the girls were. And so, and then I don't know that as a child I recognized that I was gay, but I knew there was something different.
Right.
I knew there was an attraction. And then there were other things that set me apart. And I grew up in church. My family was not what I would call super religious, but we went to church every week. And so it gave me a sense of community. And I was, in a small town. And so for most small towns or a lot of places, church is central to a lot of things. And so that's, a huge part of it too.
Have you reconciled all that for yourself? Like, as far as, do you still feel the need for congregation, or are you okay doing your own thing, or what?
I have not gotten to a place where I long for congregation. I have visited a few specific churches that I know are LGBTQ friendly, and my fiance and I have talked about visiting together to see if there was one we feel like would fit for us. It's not something we felt an urge to do. We both feel very strongly that a person's religious beliefs and spiritual life are very personal. And so we differ a little bit in our perspectives of it because our experiences are different.
Sure.
But we've talked about what that might look like for us as a couple. It's not something I've done yet. I do feel, at peace with how I believe and my relationship.
Right.
And so for me, that was a huge portion of the battle.
And I guess writing the book helped you with that, right?
Writing the book did help me with that because I struggled even when I reached the point of knowing that I wanted to come out, and that because for a long time I told myself, okay, yes, you're homosexual, you're just not going to act on it. You're going to do X, Y, and Z and focus your energy on work and being a good auntie and all these other things. And then I just realized I just wasn't happy because there was something missing, and it was that I wasn't being my whole self. And so writing the book captures a whole lot of that process. Not all of it to any extent, but it helped me sort of just work through. And I don't necessarily view it as therapy, but just so much of what I was going through comes out in the writing because I was trying to, in the poems, be authentic and be honest about what I experienced. Whether I was writing about the past or coming out or any of it, I wanted it to be as true as it could be. And so
Marilyn Robinson says that writing is like praying. Would you agree with that notion?
I mean, I think it can be. I think it's interesting as writers and artists, you commit yourself to this thing that it's never clear if there are rewards, and rewards aren't the point of it, but you commit yourself to the process without knowing the outcome, I think. Because this isn't the first book I've written, but it is the first book I wanted to be published. And so, you write because you feel compelled to create, and this is how I feel compelled to create. And there's so much of what I do that no one ever sees. And so I guess in a lot of ways it is like prayer, just because prayer is an act of faith.
Prophet, yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways so is writing.
I think the weird thing about it is, even though a lot of our writing does end up being seen by other people, it's still such a private act when you're doing it, It is. I mean, it's not a group activity, but it's also and I don't write a lot of fiction, but even when I write fiction, you're giving of your time and your creative energy and your imagination. And so it's a private act. It's a very individual act. It's something that you have to be committed to. This is On the Porch with Silas House. We're talking to poet Savannah Sipple here on WUKY 91.3 FM. Thanks for joining us. Well, Savannah, we both identify strongly as Appalachians. And all of our lives, the whole world has been telling us what is wrong with our place and often how to fix it, what needs changed. But as an Appalachian writer, I think you are really good at neither vilifying nor romanticizing the place. Both, I think, are equally dangerous. It's such a complex region, and to me, you really show that in the book. And there's one big epic poem in the book that I think is just a definitive poem of modern Appalachia. My students really react to it. But some people in the region are so used to Appalachia being criticized, that they don't want it to be criticized in any way, shape, or form. And it leads to some romanticizing happening. Mm-hmm. So with that said, did you hesitate, even as a native, to talk about the love-hate relationship you have with the place?
I didn't. And I think the reason for that is because I definitely felt pressure as a younger writer because of the narratives that are so established and that are just stereotyped to death. Mm-hmm. I felt pressure to show what's good about the region and what our strengths are. And that is important. But that felt so dishonest to me because my experiences in the region, I have had wonderful experiences as an Appalachian, and there are so many wonderful aspects of the culture and of the mountains, but we're all complex and complicated beings, and it's the same is true of our of Appalachia. And so it felt dishonest for me to overlook the flaws. Mm-hmm. It would be wrong for me to write about my experiences as a woman and not admit the misogyny and the violence that women experience. Yeah. And so it's painting an inaccurate portrait, and that is just as damaging as only focusing on what's bad. Right. I think. Yeah. And so I was very, very deliberate in trying to capture the complexities of it. Mm.
One of my favorite poems in the book is Darling, You're a Stain. Mm-hmm. Would you read that one to us, and then we'll talk just a little bit about it?
Mm-hmm. Darling, you're a stain. Tobacco brown, round splashes on my hands, my arms. The smell of skull, wintergreen, lingers on my neck when you kiss on me. Every crevice an open spit cup, every dark flake a hickey. Your fat plug tucked between teeth and lip. My mouth a pouch where you spread white patches, sores. I'm losing my voice. I've tried to wear you close as overalls, arms locked heavy over shoulders. I want to quit you cold turkey, but you stalk in spitting distance. And these yellow stains on my fingers, your fire-cured taints on my teeth, I can't strip them, can't scour your heels away.
So to me as a reader, I interpret that poem as being about Appalachia. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can take it several ways, but that's the way it strikes me. Am I totally off course?
No, you're right. Yeah, it's in many ways the whole book is a love letter, but there are many love poems in the book, and a lot of them are to Appalachia. Right.
One line that really sticks out to me is, I want to quit you cold turkey. I lived in Eastern Kentucky all my life until about 10 years ago, and even though I'm only an hour away from there, I remain deeply homesick. Why does the place have such a hold on us?
I mean, I wish I could tell you.
That's why we write about it, because we don't know, right?
I think so, and I think there's something to be said, and I think it has to do with the culture, and I know that this probably exists in other kinds of cultures. It's a culture that is based on so many things that ground you and root you, whether that's heavily based in family, and not just your immediate family, but your extended family. But then there's the connection to the land, at least when I was growing up. And I don't know, I'm assuming this is true today, but maybe not to the same extent. I mean, when you garden and care for the land and work so hard to preserve what you grow, and so much of being able to eat or get through the winter depends on how much you garden and how much you preserve. That connects you to a place. It connects you to a people. I think that poverty also has something to do with it, because there's a kind of dependency that you develop or resilience that you develop in learning how to survive in a place that's impoverished. Mm-hmm. And that connects you even more to the land, that connects you even more to the people. And so, I don't know. It's just, it makes it hard to walk away completely.
Right. Well, on that last point you said, I was first published about 18 years ago, and in that time, I have come to see the literary world as more and more classist. Mm-hmm. And not being raised with money, mm-hmm. I think often when I'm in a room full of literary people, I feel like such an outsider just based on class mm-hmm. alone, not even bringing in accent or dialect into it, but just the way you're raised with or without money is such a dividing thing for mm-hmm. us as Americans. Is that something that matters in your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that class comes into play because, I mean, my experience is I wasn't raised with money. My parents were both blue-collar workers and worked very hard for what we had. And I was fortunate in that they made ends meet. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it was hard. I mean, sometimes it was very hard. And it was paycheck to paycheck. And so I can recognize that I was more fortunate than some of my classmates. But then I also had friends whose parents had college educations and mm-hmm. jobs that reflected as such. And I can remember different points growing up, and even today, where their understanding of the differences between class, they don't even see it.
Right.
And so I see it a lot with literary, in the literary world. I think I'm starting to see it more as I do more readings and travel more for specific literary events. Yep. And so there have been times when I felt out of place before I even opened my mouth or even, right. you know, it's interesting to me because to me, I don't see how people don't notice it.
Right.
Like, I don't understand mm-hmm. how they're not. Because also these are most of the time, I expect writers to be very aware of a lot of things, and they're just often not. Yeah. I think it's a topic we don't talk enough about. Mm-hmm. Is the difference.
Right. There's lots of kinds of othering.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
There really is, yeah.
Well, to change gears just a little bit, I know that we've both loved Mary Oliver, who mm-hmm. recently passed away. What are the other major poets for you?
You know, Mary was the first one I came to. Her collection, Dreamwork, was the very first collection of poetry I ever read. The next poet I fell in love with was Rita Dove. Mm. And Adrienne Rich has also shaped me. Alicia Ostriker, mm-hmm. who I came to later in the last few years, came to really love her work. I love Audre Lorde, her poetry and her prose. Mm-hmm. Langston Hughes. One of the things that when I started, very first conceived of writing this book, and it was a very different book when I first started, but I listened to a lot of blues and jazz and read Langston Hughes and fell in love with his work in a way. And I had read a fair amount of him in the past, but it, for some reason, I don't know, it opened up to me in a way and it hadn't. There are a few contemporary authors who have really, I think, shaped me and given me a sense of empowerment. I think I love Ross Gay's work. I think he's fantastic. Nikki
mm-hmm.
Finney is another one. Her collection, Rice, is one that I will always hold close.
Well, thanks so much for being here with us today, Savannah. I sure appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for listening to On the Porch. Until next time, be good to one another. Here's Joan Osborne doing One of Us. You've been listening to the podcast version of On the Porch, recorded at the studios of WUKY in Lexington, Kentucky. The show is engineered by John Lumagi and Tom Godell, and is produced by Tom Goodell. You can find the show in its regular broadcast, where we include a half hour of music on WUKY 91.3 FM or at WUKY.org.